Hi there and welcome to our monthly LinkedIn Live. So today I am talking to Alyson, Ainsworth and Maria Mann, and we're going to be talking about the questions to ask at interview. So please do let us know if you're here and you're watching, where you're joining from, whether that's now or later on catch up. Ask any questions you might have. If you're watching on the catch up, then we will respond to those questions a bit later. So I'm just going to quickly hand over for a couple of intros. So first of all, over to you, Maria.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria, and I'm a career coach with 1080, with a particular focus on helping people work out what they want to do next, and then how to get there.
Brilliant. Okay. And Alyson?
Hi, I'm Alyson Ainsworth, an executive and career coach working with 1080. And again, just generalist in the sense of enjoying supporting people finding their next role, but also focusing on things like resilience and how you're going to get there in terms of career transition.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm Sarah Burgess. I specialise in LinkedIn coaching and hosting these kind of sessions. So we're going to go straight on to our first question, which is to Alyson, which is, why do we need to ask questions at interview?
It's a great question. I mean, I always go back to thinking about clarifying whether the organisation is right for you. And when I'm talking to my clients, I talk a lot about fit and what is a good fit with you. So it's never just about the job or the role. It is always about the skills, the values, the motivators, the culture, the environment, the package, the location. You know, it's all of those things that would suggest a good fit with you and a potential role that you're looking at. And sometimes the job descriptions aren't particularly clear, and therefore clarifying questions are probably one of the only ways that you are going to understand whether it meets all of your needs. So once you've worked out what ideal is for you, you will probably have some questions, whether it's around the company culture, the team, the boss, the people that you'll be working with, your development opportunities, particularly if you're looking at things like values, if you are looking for learning and development or growth or challenge or those sorts of things. Those are the types of questions you need to be asking. So yeah, absolutely. Clarifying questions are really essential for an interview.
Excellent. And kind of leading on from that, Maria, and sort of supporting what Alyson said, maybe adding some extra, but should you always ask questions at the end of the interview? So slightly different question there. But.
Yeah, I mean, in my view is that asking questions at the end of the interview is another opportunity to create an impression. So it's not only finding out what you want to know, but it's also, you're giving more information about yourself ultimately. I think as we go through this session, we'll talk about some of the things to think about when you're asking questions, but it's the opportunity to have a really positive impact. And again, to create a good impression.
Yeah, okay. Alyson, anything else to add to that part of the question?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people say to me, "Oh, well, I haven't got any questions," but as I say, for me, it doesn't show that you're interested enough in the company. And my view is that if companies nowadays have choice, they have choice of candidates, and you are trying to differentiate yourself from the next person, and therefore, if you have two candidates who can technically both do the job, but one comes with more interest, more attitude, more energy, then they are more likely to get the job. And asking questions is a way of showing that, as Maria rightly said, is that you are interested in the role and also in the company. They want to know you want to work for them. It's that ridiculous question that they say, why do you want this job? Well, most people it's because I need a job, but what companies want to know is because you want to work for them. So anything you can ask about the company that shows that you've done your research, you've done your homework, and that you are genuinely interested in being part of that will be a differentiator.
Yeah, that's true. I know I've had clients before that have said they've kind of almost frozen when they get asked that question. Have you got any questions? They don't know what to say. So I mean, what I always say is make sure you write them down before you go. If you feel like you're frozen, just say, I have got some questions. Do you mind if I look at my notes? Nobody's going to mind that, really, are they? And perhaps all your questions have been answered, but at least you can physically show that you had a list. did have a list, talk through everything. So I think that's
completely. I would say always prepare some questions. It might be that you get others come to mind through the interview. That's fine, but it's always good to have a few questions prepared, and be careful about what you're preparing, so that they're not too complicated. They show that you know a bit about the company. You've looked at the website. Maybe you've spoken to someone who knows a bit about them. It is your opportunity.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Okay. So I think that leads on to the next question we have prepared. So what types of questions are there? So Alyson, we talked about a bit about this in the run through, didn't we? So sort of different types of clarifying questions even.
Yeah, going back to what I just said about fit, I mean, there's a great way of assessing, things like, the culture of the organization. Is the culture in line with what you are looking for? Is it family friendly? Is it sociable? Is it flexible? There are lots of ways of finding out using other sources like company websites and Glassdoor and places like that. But there is nothing like asking an employee who works in the organization what it's like to work there. And equally the same with things like values, because your values can be something that is a real turning point for a lot of people in their career, is to say, no, my values do need to align to the organization. And whilst people put values out on their websites, do they really adhere to them? Are they something that they refresh? How did they come about? Was it a democratic view, or did they just suddenly find some words on the wall? And it happens. It happens.
It does.
And therefore, is it those kind of questions, around does the organisation, live up to the values? Do they, have that? Where was my question on that? Was something about, how does the company ensure it's upholding its values? Great. I think questions about the team, is there a chance to meet the team? What's the team culture like? Do they have a strong bond? Is it a sociable culture? And then also asking questions about your boss, because again, if you're looking at things like your values and things that are important to you, like autonomy and independence, and as I said, growth and learning, those sorts of things, if your boss is not going to support some of that, and that is a key relationship clearly in the people say people leave people, not people leave companies. And if that you don't have that relationship with your hiring manager or who will be your line manager, then it's a difficult one. I did have a client once who said to me they'd accepted a job and they hadn't actually met their line manager.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit of a risky strategy, because how do you know that you're going to get on with that person, you're going to have respect with that person, it's going to be a good working relationship? So all of those types of questions can really support your decision making at the end of the process, as to whether that is the right job on the right company for you.
Yeah, that's really good. I know when you talk about values, so LinkedIn have just rolled out something called commitments, which is basically values, but companies can go on now and add what's important to them as a commitment or a value. But it's not just the words, they have to actually upload evidence for that. So I think, again, as part of your research, it's really good to be able to go in and search for that kind of information on LinkedIn. And so you could then ask more questions around that, about the stuff that they have actually posted on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, LinkedIn is. I know you're the expert, but it blows my mind now when we have conversations around the kind of functionality of LinkedIn, and I think that's a great addition.
Yeah. Any comments, Maria, on other types of questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say keep your questions very clear and very kind of simple for the person that you're asking to answer, because I guess what you're not trying to do is beat them at questions. You're trying to get information, and you want them to be able to give you what you want. So keep it clear, keep it nice and simple. Do think about it beforehand, because it gives you the chance to kind of think about how you're going to frame it and what's the best thing to ask them. And ask a follow-up as well if you're not getting everything you need. And I guess the other thing, though, is to think about what your priorities for questions are, because, you've probably got lots and lots, but remember that time would have been put aside for your interview, and you need to make sure that they get time to get all the information that they want, as well as you asking a reasonable number of questions. But, if an hour's been set for it, obviously you can't take over half an hour with your questions.
Yeah.
So you just need to be mindful of that, and maybe ask them, if they don't say about questions, ask them how they want to manage questions. Are they happy to deal with them as they go through the interview? They might say, I'd rather answer them at the end. Let them manage the interview, and ask questions when it suits them.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make there about it's not a competition about how many questions you can ask, and I think it's about reading the situation, isn't it? I know I've definitely had one client who we at 1080 gave them a lot of research information on this organisation, but to the point they knew a lot more than the interviewer. And I think actually in that situation it was almost a bit dangerous, because the interviewer couldn't answer any of the questions that the client asked, and so yeah, that doesn't necessarily create the best impression either, is it?
No, there's a point to doing some research, but being overly researched. But I had a client recently who was going for an interview with a hiring manager who'd been in the organisation for 36 years. Because we looked him up on LinkedIn and we checked him out. So without actually saying to somebody, "Oh, I've looked you up on LinkedIn," which I always recommend to people that they do when they go for interview. I said to him, great question would be to say, why have you been in the company so long? What's kept you for 36 years? Why have you stayed so long in this organisation? So he'll kind of subtly know that you've looked him up, without saying, I've been stalking you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think also, likewise, if somebody hasn't been with the organisation very long, and at the moment I'm hearing this quite a lot, that the manager is new as well, then obviously their wider organisational knowledge is going to be quite limited, and it's kind of being a bit sensitive to that.
Yeah. But it's also like asking the question around, how did the position come about? Is it because of a growth industry? Is the department growing? And again, you'll get a sense of that from the website. But it might be that the focus is on a particular aspect in their strategy that suggests that they need to grow a particular team, etc. So you might find quite a lot of new hires.
Yeah, that's true. So Michael's just commented to say, I agree with Maria. Questions are not the opportunity to show how clever you are, but they are an opportunity to show you've done the research on the company.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on then to what should you avoid asking. So Maria, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would say as a general rule, try to avoid the sort of stuff that is obvious that you should already know, because it's a bit of a waste of one of your valuable questions. So, if you're asking something basic about the organisation, I would ask something that is a little bit less known to all. So also, I wouldn't ask about things like the salary directly, probably in most situations. There might be a situation where it is something you need to discuss, but interview isn't always going to be the best place to talk about that unless it's raised by the interviewer, I would say, in general. So I think there aren't hard and fast rules, but you want to be asking questions that show that you've understood a little bit about the company, you've read a little bit about the company, you've done more than just turn up for the interview knowing nothing. I think you want to demonstrate that you know something about them.
Yeah, okay. Alyson?
Yeah, I suppose back to Michael's point as well about doing your homework, doing your research. Quite often they'll ask you a question about the competitors of the company, and if you don't know, but asking a question like, what does the company do? You really need to have understood that, as Maria said as well. I think the salary question is a difficult one. I think it very much if you have had no indication at this stage about what the salary is, it could be a question that is a non-negotiable for you, in the sense of, if I'm going to go forward to the next stage, and there's an indication at that stage that you might, it could be something that you feel, well, actually, I really do need to raise this at some point. But as Maria said, it very much is how you do that. You don't have to say something like, how much money am I going to get paid, as opposed to saying, is it possible for you to give me a bit more information on the package and the benefits? I've seen very little of that information. So again, it's about the phrasing of the questions. And also, as Maria said, you're judging a little bit on the rapport that you've built with the interviewers, because sometimes some of those questions can sound a bit cheeky or a little bit cocky. It's like somebody saying, when can I start? It could be seen as humorous, but it could also be seen as a bit like, I also had a graduate a number of years ago who said to me in her first interview, can I start late? Can I come in late and leave early, sort of questions. And it sent some amazing alarm bells ringing. And actually, as it turned out, I wasn't wrong. But asking questions like that, can I arrive late, or start late in the day? You think, actually, you're not really committed to this job already. So anything like that could be deemed as being something where you're not really committed, I would avoid asking.
Yeah. And I think both of those things, so the salary and the kind of the working patterns, they very much changed, haven't they, over the last few years, really, since COVID. But I think salary more and more often, if you can find anything out before you even apply, I think it's so much better, because you're wasting so much time on applications and interview processes, aren't you, if you don't find that information out.
And I think there's also other ways of finding it out. So it could be that after the interview, you drop them an email and say, really keen, really interested, haven't actually talked yet about pay levels. So it would be really helpful if you could let me know when we'd be able to talk about that, or just ask. But I think maybe it's a follow-up question rather than a interview question that is more about your skills and suitability.
Yeah.
And as you said, Sarah, there are websites that you can go if people don't advertise the salary, like salary.com or payscale.com or Great Place to Work. They all give an indication of bands and levels, because most big corporates have salary bands and levels.
Yes.
So you've got a good idea if you're pitching yourself at the right level.
Yeah. And I guess the working patterns as well, as you mentioned, that's something that you probably could find out before you go for the interview. Now, it probably wasn't the case with your graduate then, but I guess now you would know that about an organisation before you went in, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And as Maria said, that has changed recently with things like remote working, hybrid working. There is more opportunity, but again, I would, you would have to understand whether you've got the right rapport with at the interview. That question in the right place.
Yeah. I would also say, I think it's good when you've been given a response to your question to just have a few words to say, to acknowledge that, that's really useful, thank you, whatever, to acknowledge that you have listened. So I know some people have come away from interviews and said, I think my questions were all right, but I didn't then say anything and I didn't really listen to the answer.
Yeah.
So, you can get yourself so keyed up that you forget to actually listen. You're so relieved that you've asked the question. So I would say, make sure you listen to the answer and give some sort of response, because it's easy to assume things that the interviewer has heard or has made an inference. They won't necessarily have done that. So it's good to say, that sounds great, or thank you for that, just to acknowledge.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So you've already sort of mentioned this, Alyson, but should you look people up beforehand and ask them questions about their career or position? Do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think you should. I mean, I always say, I would expect somebody to look me up on LinkedIn, particularly to know what my discipline is, where I've come from, what my background is. So, if there are going to be two people in the room, and again, always ask before you go, you know, how many people are going to be there, what kind of format of interview is it, so you'll know. But yeah, I would definitely expect somebody to look me up, because at least you will have an indication of what I'm interested in. And as I said, that particular example of the guy who'd been there 36 years, I've forgotten we were going to mention that later on, was the example I mentioned before. Was, you know, it would definitely show you'd looked him up. But you know, what an interesting question to see, you know, why he had stayed in the company, and you can only assume it was because he had developed through the organisation. He was at a very senior level by this stage, so it obviously created the right opportunities for him over his career. So yeah, absolutely, I would expect somebody to look me up.
And I think this is another one that's changed over time, really, because I think a few years ago you might not have, or people might have been a little bit more careful about that sort of thing. But I think now, if I was interviewing, I would expect people to have looked me up. And I think I'd be a little bit disappointed if somebody hadn't. I would think, as part of their preparation, that would be a sensible thing to do. So I think
that would be a question to that. So what about sending a connection request to the person that's interviewing you? What do you think about that?
Well, I personally would say that's a step too far. I probably, if I was interviewing, and it's possibly my HR background that I would feel slightly uncomfortable with that. I think possibly if they'd been offered the job, then I might accept a request from them. But you know, at that stage, if you're not sure whether you're going to recruit them or not, I think it's a little bit, I don't know. In my view, I would probably not accept a request at that stage.
Yeah. What do you think, Maria?
Yeah, I've had requests when I was in HR after the decision's been made from people that have been successful, and I've been quite happy to accept them on the basis that, you know, they could be a potential candidate for another role in the future. So I guess probably not prior to the interview and not until a decision's been made. But I think once that stage is over, then certainly I'd be open to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably follow them at least, because then you can see any updates. And I'm kind of torn, actually. I think it probably depends on if you have already built up a bit of a rapport. So it might be that I've got lots of candidates that look for jobs at Google. So actually they do send connection requests to the recruiters at Google, and they accept, and they end up having a dialogue, and that's really helpful for them. But yeah, I guess if it's a line manager in an organisation, they might not be so comfortable with that. So I guess it goes back to company values and individual values as well, doesn't it?
And individual roles, I think, as I say, from our point of view, I think I'd feel slightly more uncomfortable on the basis of being equitable and fair. Wouldn't want somebody to think, because if they looked at your connection and say, well, they got the job because you're connected to them, or, you know. So
that's a good point.
That would slightly bother me, but
So I've seen a couple of comments come through. So Michael saying good salary checker, so there's a link there, so thank you for that. And Vashi is saying, agree with Alyson, looking people up shows curiosity and commitment, especially if you can find something net worthy to mention at interview. So yes, that's a good point as well.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so questions you should wait to ask. We've kind of touched a bit on this already, but Maria, anything else that you think waiting to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of factual things maybe about your T's and C's that I think, you know, kind of for me would be kind of final stage questions when you're made an offer. It's always good to have a conversation first, I would say, before you kind of accept if you receive an offer. And that's the stage where you can ask the factual stuff. I think the hybrid working one is an interesting one, because I think that can be quite key for a lot of people. So that's probably one that it is better to ask at interview stage in general. But it might be that there's some aspects of it that you want to clarify, you know, on receiving an offer just before you know, commit yourself to the role.
Yeah.
So I think, be clear what you need to know before you commit to the role.
Yeah.
And there will be some things that you probably want to follow up with before you accept it.
Great. Okay. Alyson, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to my term about non-negotiables. As Maria said, there may be some things that say, well, actually, if it means I've got 50% travel, or I've got to, I'm not going to be able to work remotely, or things like that, that might say, well, actually, this is not going to work for me. So those are the questions that I suppose I would be pushing to ask.
Yeah.
Because once you get your contract, as Maria said, again, you can then go back and challenge some of those questions, or ask and say, is there any movement on the salary, or is there any movement, or or is this is not what I had expected. So there's always a follow-up, as you say, to that. But there may be a few that are that will be a deciding factor for you. I always say to my clients, it's never a problem until you're offered the job, and then you've got to decide whether it's the right one for you. So much information as you've got beforehand that will enable you to make the right decision is helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a bit about the salary questions. We don't need to touch on that again now. But then I guess it's the things like how you're going to end the interview. So we talked before about questions like this, didn't we? So what are the next steps? And I can tell you about me. So Alyson, talk a bit more about those and how you introduce those.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really the key part to the interview. And as I said at the beginning, it is around showing that you are interested in the job and will differentiate you. So leaving them with a clear impression that you are interested, so saying something like, on the basis of everything I've heard today, I'm really interested in the job. What are the next steps? It's really a clear way of saying I'm interested in the job. I've spoken to so many recruiters, and so many times when people leave an interview and you think, did they want the job or not? Like they say thank you, being polite about the way you ask questions. When will I hear? And the other one is, as you said, is there anything else I can tell you about me? I love that clarifying question. Is there anything else that you need to know about me in order for you to make the right decision?
Yeah.
Such a great question, because at the end of the day, you might have lots of experience in a particular area that nobody's asked you about.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you haven't got it. They just didn't ask you whether you had that. So, is there anything else that you need to know about me that would be helpful, or that I can, that will help you make the right decision? I love that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Maria, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think likewise on that topic, if there's something that you haven't been able to say in the interview, then do make sure you bring it out at that point as well. So, there might be something that you've done that you think could be relevant and that is quite a big thing or quite impressive or whatever. And make sure that you do introduce it and say it. It's your opportunity to get everything, all your sales points in that you can.
Yeah, that's good. So Hannah's just put a comment on to say her favourite question to ask the interviewer is why they enjoy working for the organisation. So yeah, I think that's always a good question.
Yeah, it's not
Hopefully
too
they can answer. Great. Okay. So we've covered. Should I tell them I'm keen on the job? So that's good. So we will end now with a top tip. So Alyson, have you got a top tip for people when they're thinking about this topic?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my point about differentiating yourself, really, and showing that you're interested, and making sure you leave them with the impression that you are interested in both the organisation and the job, because in a competitive market that we find ourselves in at the moment, employers have choice, and if they have two people who can technically both do the job, they're all going to go with the person who shows the most interest in the company. And I have got experience of that happening, where a client of mine didn't technically have all of the things that they needed for the role, but she was enthusiastic, she'd done her homework, she'd prepared her competency-based interview, and she asked some really pertinent questions.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And Maria, top tip from you?
My top tip is to think about the questions that you're going to want to ask. before the interview. Don't kind of expect inspiration to strike at the end. You know, prepare it, think carefully about what you want to ask and the message that you'll be giving through those questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So thank you very much, Maria and Alyson. There's been some really great information in there. And thank you to everyone that's watching. If you are watching on catch up, then please do feel free to ask questions and we'll go back and answer them later on. So thanks again. And please join us again on the 18th of July when I'm going to be talking to Russ Hartlanshaw and Liz. So titles to be confirmed, but it's something around mental health. So looking forward to having that conversation. So thanks again and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.